Happy New Year, friends.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, new. I don't know. We don't really do necessarily New Year's resolutions, but to me, it always does feel like a time when you can start fresh, kind of step back. It's a
Yeah.
marker to look at your life and say,
Yeah, I think just this time of year, as we've gotten into the darkness, well, at least for a lot of us, it's sort of a time of you can't do the same things you do in the summertime. And so I find myself sort of reflecting on the things I have done and then how I might want to be in the coming moons as that we move towards light and as we enter into, a new calendar year.
yeah.
Yeah.
You speak of darkness here, and I feel like our past year had some rough spots. It had some darkness.
Yeah, I would say it was a particularly hard year in a
Yeah.
lot of ways. Um, not just in losing people that we loved, but also that change. It's funny, but it's very important that we keep challenging ourselves and we keep growing. But sometimes, growing pains are real, and I think it's difficult when maybe multiple people in your family or your life are also going through growing pains while you're going through growing pains. And then it feels a little bit as though, I don't know,
It can be so much mud
everything.
that you get stuck in it.
Yeah, it's really not. I keep thinking to myself, wow, when's it going to feel easy again? Or when's it going to feel smooth? Yeah, and mud is a good word for it, or darkness. But yeah, the mud kind of gives you that, how hard it is when you get your boots slapped in
Right.
mud and you're really trying. You're trying as much as you normally would, even more, and you're just getting less far. Or so it seems.
Yeah, lots of effort for not much. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
how it can feel. But sometimes,
Well, mud is important, right? If we're going to be
yeah.
talking about this in a sort of representational way, which everything we talk about is, as you pointed out, kind of a myth. Um,
Should we talk about our friends that go and harvest
yeah,
Lotus from
yeah,
the Mississippi?
yeah. I'm so inspired by them. They gather and eat wild food a lot, and their lives, way more than ours, revolve around the seasons. And the Mississippi has some really great mud, and that's where the lotus grow. And so you have to go in and you have to go and get in the water and you get down there with your toes and
Wish around.
yeah, and dig up the mud, and from that there's nourishment. Without, I think, in a way, without any of, the concept is without any of the earth, any of the mud, there isn't life, growth, nourishment.
Yeah. And when I think about that lotus, I think about the food that they harvest from there. So there's a big root they
Yeah,
harvest, and there's lotus nuts. But of course, the lotus has also been a perennial favorite spiritually
yeah,
because it's this amazing, beautiful flower. But significantly, it does arise out
yes,
of the mud.
yeah. And I think in a weird way, it's strange for me to think about a new year. It's strange to think about. We've hit the winter solstice and we're returning towards the longer days and we're returning towards the light. So it's strange for me to think of beginning a new year by thinking about darkness or mud. But I think it's important not to be uh, to try to distance ourselves from the things that are challenging, in the sense that there is a lesson and a gift in those. There is a root and nourishment and a beautiful flower. And I think if we can be with the mud, and maybe not even just be with it, but recognize its gifts, it sets my mind at ease more. I can look back at my past year, which had some really beautiful parts to it, But I can also look at the hard parts and I can say, okay, how am I growing? How am I learning? What can I get from this? And then even in my hardest times when I don't have the energy to be positive like that, it is just nice for me to think that all I need to do is understand that from mud the lotus grows. And I can just let it be at that. You know, versus sometimes our culture saying, okay, I love self-help books. But a lot of times they make me feel like I'm not doing enough. Or if only I would do this and only I would do that. And there's like a million if onlys. I think we talked about the shoulds. And so sometimes just that from the mud comes the lotus. And that's all I need to think about right now. It's kind of like in grief, just do the best that you can to be your best self within what you're experiencing. Sometimes you just have to suffer gracefully. And that's the most we can do at that moment. And to know that it will change, that things are growing, that things are happening. If we simply hold on long enough, we will see that things do arise.
Yeah. I think when I think of religions like Christianity, this has always been something that theologians have wrestled with. If God is love, how can there be these evil or bad things that happen? And we can wrestle with that same thing and with the path of Divine Mother. Divine Mother is love incarnate, and she's building all this out of love. Why do we see or experience suffering? Why can't she just make life all just happy all the time? And I think, we humans, we get so locked into the things that we want and into our comforts, even into the idea of, life is something that we can't let go of.
Mm-hmm.
Not realizing sometimes that, it might be that we die and we find, oh, okay, this is a liberation. It's like birth. It's not the terrible thing that, the little infant might be. Oh my gosh, I've been here.
Stick me back in the womb, why don't you?
But then finds that there's this emergence into this new way of being. And so that might be what we're destined to encounter. And maybe we'll look back and then we'll say, oh, my fighting against death, I see that I didn't have to fight so much, that it's not the evil, terrible thing that I thought. And obviously in many other places in our regular lives, we get to experience negatives that then have lessons for us. And we find, wow, if I hadn't experienced that, I wouldn't have grown in this new way. I wouldn't be the person I was.
Yeah.
Ideally, most of us, I think, can look back at our lives and say, wow, okay, there's some tough stuff, and it's made me who I am.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of examples of people who have had powerful influences on the world or even in our own lives who would not be the people that they are and have the stories to share with us if they hadn't undergone their trials and their mud and held on and allowed it to blossom into what it was. I'm thinking about Alan Watts real quick, what you said about life and about, love and God and everything, made me think about something that he talked about, which was that the beauty of life is that it is fleeting and that we somehow know. He talks about a rose and he talks about part of the essence of the rose is that it will not last. And that is what we are drawn to, is the fact that it is ephemeral, and that makes it more precious than it, I think he maybe even goes on to talk about, but if not, it always came to my mind, a plastic rose. Put all the grass is astroturf, all the flowers are plastic, they'll never die. Why does that not do something for us? Why does that not make us go, oh, okay, good. Yay, I'll always get to see the flowers and I'll always get to see the grass. Why somewhere within us is there that feeling of, oh, but wait.
I'd compare it to your cheesecake. So
we did have cheesecake finally.
Yeah, yes. We had friends over and had a a wonderful,
A
very
delayed
belated
holiday.
holiday
Yeah,
gather.
because we had the flu.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you made this cheesecake, and you took the wild grapes
Mm.
that you made into a juice, which is a painstaking process.
Yeah.
And then you reduced that juice into this thick liquid, added just the perfect amount of sweetener, and you made this ambrosia that was drizzled over the cheesecake that you could sit with one drop of that and just soak into it. It was so, so, so good. Those, incidentally, are the things that, when it's easiest for me to invite Divine Mother in and say, I cannot leave you out of this. You gotta taste this. This is unbelievable. But those are the experiences that, in a certain sort of imagination, that way of thinking of that we'll go to a heaven where everything will be perfect. We can think, well, geez, I wish I could just eat the cheesecake forever and never stop eating it.
With the wild grape.
And just eat and eat and eat and eat and eat and eat. Which oddly then is a little like the idea of hell, right? The gluttony. Oddly. Well, anyway, but knowing that you've got this one slice of cheesecake gives it so much more depth and allows us in a way to soak into it, to love it, to experience it much more than if we just could eat through it. And we probably all know people that sit down and they just eat something and don't taste it or experience it. And you probably know people, Liliana's, man, she yesterday spent the last couple little teeny bits of that cheesecake, and she spent about 5 minutes on each bite, just licking it, tasting it, savoring it. But if there was an endless supply, if it never stopped, we may not feel the same way about it. We may not experience it. We may not be urged, kind of hear a secret way of Divine Mother urging us, soak into this moment. That's why seeing the mud, recognizing the ephemerality of life, recognizing that things won't stay, can be this giant gift.
Wow. Well, I had a thought.
Oh, and I spoke over you.
No, you didn't. It's okay. It was lately I've been having that where I have this thought and then I don't speak it and then it just goes away. That's okay. Maybe it wasn't important. It was something that we talked about in a previous video that had to do with this idea of loving things right when you have them. But, well, if it comes back to me, I'll share it. Yeah. I think it's, I know what it is. It's that with the mud in the lotus, it's easy to see. We don't ask, why is there all this mud, right? If we see the lotus flower and we know the lotus flower requires the mud to come into, manifestation, we don't question it. And I'm not saying we shouldn't question bad things that happen, but sometimes I think in the questioning of them, there is a strong desire in the human ego to understand why. And so there's this question of, why did this happen? Why is this way? Why is the world like this? And I come back to that the question really isn't why. We're asking the wrong question. The question really is, how can I live in this world with this mud and still rise to the clear water above and be a lotus flower? And I think, again, I come back to when I ask, how can I move forward even though this is really hard, or I'm filled with grief and sorrow, or I'm, angry and frustrated? How can I be still my best self? How can I connect with Divine Mother? How can I deepen that love of everything? Then I have an open gate in which to take action forward, because it's up to me to answer the how of that. How will I? Okay, then I can move forward. The why just sits there and goes around in circles and circles. And so another lesson for me with the lotus flower and the mud is to realize it's important for me to ask the right question about things that happen. in my life, the things that I would maybe consider mud. I know it's happening when I go, I don't like this and I don't want this and I never want this to be like this again. That's when I'm in the mud. And then I can get stuck in that why and what's wrong with me and how could I let this happen? And that's, to me, I think that's kind of going, ugh, what's with the mud? Let's get rid of that instead of lifting ourselves up into that clearer water.
I wonder sometimes if we could get to a place in life where we didn't fear the mud. You know what you're talking about there, where we almost welcomed it. I'm thinking of role playing. If you've ever played Dungeons and Dragons or something like that, you expect the dungeon master to give you some challenges, some tough things, some whoa, this is happening, the dragon attacks, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And
well, that's why we watch a lot of those kinds of movies and read books, and we're waiting for.
Yeah, we want to see the characters grow, and we want to. Just tougher to do when you're the main character. And I'm not quite sure where that idea comes from, that we would want life to be just 100%. I wonder if it's cultural. You know, we have a culture that just pushes comfort so strongly.
Mm-hmm.
And the messaging is that whether it's a lazy boy ad or a pill that's going to help you do this or whatever it is, the best life would be a life where you just could just sit on the couch and just enjoy life without having to work or do anything.
The movie WALL-E, where all the people have their little bubbles with their little drinks, and then it just floats them around, and
you don't have to do anything. Yeah. But that's not. Yeah.
I don't think that's what we really are nourished by. And we could talk a long time about our culture and cultural goo, and the ways in which we seek pleasure and comfort, but not actually pleasure and comfort. And I think that's a really good thing to remember. What helps me sometimes is to ask, am I okay with my mud, or would I go take someone else's mud? You know? Because a lot of times when I do that, I'm like, I'll take my own mud right here and I'll deal with that. I'm okay with not having that person's mud. And again, that comes down to a judgment. I think in a way, I'm a believer that we are here, as you said so wisely, in a couple of one of the past messages, to be an experiencer. And so if I can truly remember I am here and I'm in a story and I'm a manifestation, and that I'm in a weird way just one instrument's voice in a whole symphony, I can be more comforted and choose better paths for myself in times that are challenging. So I think it's important to really come from that experiencer role where you were talking, I am the character, this is the game I am in. And in a way, then maybe we would take it less seriously and we would go, the mud, all right, can't wait to see what kind of flower comes up from this one. But that's definitely not the way that we've been trained.
No. And the odd thing is that I think sometimes that if we welcomed the mud, we'd experience less of it. And this can even be, if you want to be all scientific about it, if you think about, if I'm really fearing, let's say some kind of health thing, I'm really fearing that I'm going to have a heart attack, and I fear that every day.
Yeah. I'm
adding enough stress to my system that I'm heightening my way in that direction.
Yeah.
And the same thing, if I go.
No, exactly. Yeah, I was just going to say it's the opposite too. Yeah, if we have a more relaxed attitude. Well, you can see it. So we're up here in the barn. You can see it with horses too. If something happens. Okay, so I let a horse out the other day. I was trying to use my leg as an extender of my body, and that clearly did not communicate, don't go out the gate. And so in our big black horse saw the gate was open and said, okay, and off he went. And in that situation, a lot of things could have happened. Having a horse loose can be very dangerous for the horse and for other people. And so, it could be considered very serious. At the same time, the more that the energy level rises in me, the more it's going to be difficult for me to bring my horse back into me. And so, what's called for in a situation like that is to realize it's going to be okay. The horse is going to come back to the barn. This is where the food is. What can I do in the meantime? And then I feel as though sometimes just taking that moment instead of reacting, just okay, then we can, in a weird way, take less time catching the horse than if we're panicked and we're trying to get the horse and we're chasing it around. You can see it. That's definitely a metaphor. Don't go chasing things around. Be still for a moment, put some grain in a bucket, shake it. Here comes your horse. Um,
Yeah, and it was really nice because as soon as that happened, the first thing you did is reminded us all, everybody that was in the barn there, that relaxation would be the best option right here. And sure enough, and you always, yeah, it's nice. You always model that in
well,
tense situations.
I'm lucky, but I think it's important even in little everyday situations because, as you pointed out, if we are worried about something, that can easily influence things. Of course, then what happens to me when I'm anxious is that I'm worried that I'm worried. So you have to somehow find a way to override that. And if you are worried, then you find a practice for that. So, which I think that's what this is all about, is finding a practice for coming to terms with the mud of life and realizing that flowers do grow. Lotuses blossom from the mud, and they will be there, but we'll miss them if we are so dead set on trying to just dredge the pond.
We can train our brains into this a little bit by look at things in your past and think of things that were bad when you were experiencing them, and then think of the good that came out of them, and remind yourself. And if you do that for a few things in your past, and then you continue to do it with things that happen in your present life, so you're saying, oh, that was, oh man, I remember, I thought it was the end of the world when this happened, and my life never would have turned out like this if it hadn't. And so the more we train ourselves into that, the more that we can start to reshape how we look at muddy things and say, okay, maybe that mud is going to have a gift, even when we're in the midst of it, because that's when it's toughest.
Yeah, it is good. And as I said at the beginning, kind of just to think, lotus blossoms arise from mud.
Yeah.
Because sometimes some things are hard, really, really hard, especially when we're in them. But I think it's important to realize that when we acknowledge the gifts that come from them, we do honor to the things that seem so icky at the time. Yeah. I mean, there's going to be times when things happen that, we have no control of and may affect us for the rest of our lives. But when we see the gifts from that, we do, honor to the person we've lost or the thing that has altered us forever. And I don't know, personally for me, given a choice, I want to have those things. I want to live with that perspective. I want to share, with others then. So if maybe I could alleviate someone else's, suffering a little by saying, hey, here's this happened to me. It's wonderful to be able to see that we are all the same in the end. We all have our own mud, and we also all have our own lotus blossoms. And so, can we share the lotus blossoms a little bit more? That's kind of how I want to go forward in 2025, as that is my mantra, the lotus from mud, and really try to lean into that and be reminded of that. So that's kind of one of the reasons why I think it is fun to talk about right now, because it's sort of a foundational perspective for me to try to touch back on throughout the year.
Thank you for joining us, friends.
Yeah. As always, we'd love if you want to share with us. There's so many fun different aspects to talk about with this concept. And so just share what's come to your mind, or ways that you find to deal with the mud in your own life and the gifts that you've received from it. We're wishing you all the best. Many, many lotus blossoms. Mwah.